Everything began with love, real, sincere, devoted down to the smallest details, with flowers for no reason, notes left on a pillow, candlelit dinners. He thought that was strength. Turned out, it was a sentence. When you're seen as too kind, they start to eat you alive. Slowly. First goes respect, then boundaries, then you. But even the gentlest can become a predator when cornered, especially if he knows how to wait, to remember, to listen. They thought he'd stay silent, swallow it, forgive. What they didn't realize was this. He knew how to strike back so precisely, punishment turned into performance. With flashing police lights, TV cameras, handcuffs, and fake smiles wiped away in a blink. No one noticed the moment he stopped being a husband. He became a director. And when the curtain fell, he was the only one who heard the applause. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If it's your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, as every like truly inspires me. Please tell me which city and country you watched this video from. Now, let's get started. There was a time when I truly believed that the more love you showed a woman, the more attention you gave, the more you fulfilled her desires, the more she'd cherish having you in her life. I don't think that way anymore. Now, I believe that kind of devotion can have the opposite effect. Instead of appreciation, it breeds complacency. She begins to believe that she can act however she wants, unchecked, because either you won't notice, or worse, you'll excuse it. I first met Emma during our freshman year of college. We started seeing each other, but our connection was unpredictable, full of starts and stops. There was a strong physical pull between us, no doubt, but neither of us was looking for anything serious at the time. It wasn't until the middle of our senior year that we reconnected in a more meaningful way. That time, we stuck together. Within 6 months of graduating, we were married. Not long after that, my parents celebrated their 25th anniversary. During the party, I found a moment alone with my dad and asked him what their secret was. I brought up how many of our friends' relationships were constantly turbulent, always arguing, always on edge. I asked him, "How did you and Mom avoid falling into that pattern?" He smiled gently and said, "The secret is to show her every single day that you love her. Not just with words, but with action. Never assume she just knows. You have to make it clear, consistently. That's what keeps the connection alive." I took those words to heart. For the next 7 years, I made it a personal mission to never let a day pass without showing Emma how much she meant to me. I remembered every birthday, every anniversary, no matter how small. I even made up new ones, just to give us something more to celebrate. She got a bouquet on the anniversary of the first time she cooked meatloaf. I gave her a handwritten note after she ran her first load of laundry in our brand new machines. When she earned a promotion, I treated it like a national holiday. On the anniversary of our first night together, she received chocolates and roses. I gave her diamond earrings to mark our first time being intimate. Sometimes I'd send flowers to her office for no reason other than to say, "I love you." I made sure she felt special, every day. That was the philosophy my father had lived by, and I followed it religiously. But what I failed to understand, what my father never mentioned, was that not all women interpret love the same way. To my mom, those little acts were constant affirmations of devotion. But to Emma, they began to seem like desperation. She saw me not as someone honoring her, but as someone clinging, always eager for her approval, always seeking reassurance. In trying to lift her up, I somehow diminished myself in her eyes. I didn't notice it happening. I honestly thought we were in a good place. Our careers were thriving. Our lives were busy but fulfilling. We were both putting in long hours, sometimes traveling, sometimes barely seeing one another during the week. I assumed it was all part of building a life together. I figured she understood that, just like I did. And when we did have time together, I went all in. Our physical connection was still electric. There were weekends where we barely left our bedroom. Emma would look at me, smiling, and say things like, "You have me, all of me, always." And I believed her. That belief was shattered at her company's Christmas party. It was held downtown in a hotel ballroom. Her employer had gone all out, reserving rooms for guests and setting up a formal evening. The party started at 7. I had a client in from out of town that morning and told Emma I'd arrive late, probably around 8:30. But plans changed last minute. The client extended his trip, giving me an unexpected window. I got to the hotel around 7:30 instead. As I stepped into the ballroom, my eyes landed on Emma, wrapped in the arms of a man I didn't recognize. I wasn't familiar with most of her co-workers, having only met a few at company events over the years. But it wasn't his identity that bothered me. It was how closely she held him. Her arms were around his waist, their bodies too familiar. I kept a quiet distance as they left the ballroom and walked down a side hallway that led to a small area with 3 guest rooms. I wasn't sure which room they entered, so I checked them one by one. The first was empty, the second also vacant. I was about to try the third when I paused. I heard faint laughter. The room looked undisturbed, but I stepped inside to investigate. That's when I heard another giggle, this one clearer and from above. It was coming through the air vent. That's when it hit me. The voices were coming from the room next door. I turned toward the final door just as Emma's voice filtered through the vent. "Careful. Don't rip the dress. You'll never get what you want that way." Then came the man's voice. "God, Emma, I could stare at these all night. Let me taste those incredible curves." She laughed softly. "Not yet. You know the rules. I get my toy first. No touching until I've had my turn." I heard clothes shifting, the sound of a zipper, and then her voice again. I'll never get tired of that. Are you sure we don't have time to sneak into one of the rooms?" Her tone turned pleading. "I need you. Right now." His response was calm. "We already had lunch, and Monday night. You'll survive until tomorrow." "I can't go through with this." "You don't have much of a say." "Ethan said he'd be here by 8:30. I was supposed to be around when he showed up. If he gets here early and sees me coming down with post-sex hair and a guilty glow, he's going to start asking questions. That's the last thing we need." "Come on, Emma. If he's half as clueless as you claim, we could be at it right in front of him, and he'd still be none the wiser." "I get it, babe. I could always tell him to head out early, say we'll catch up another time. Then I'd laugh it off, say we were just playing a prank. He'd probably fall for it. But just because I can manipulate the situation doesn't mean I want to create a whole circus. Are you absolutely sure we can't sneak upstairs for a quick one?" "It's not worth the gamble, honey, but I can still help take the pressure off." There was a beat of silence. Then a groan low in his throat. "God, Emma, you're unreal. Whatever magic you work with that mouth, nothing compares. Nobody's ever made me feel like this." The sounds didn't fade. They escalated, grew sharper, more intense, until they finally broke into silence. "Rick is going to flip when I tell him you helped me blow off steam while he has to wait until tomorrow. Unless he doesn't have to." "Didn't you just say today was off limits?" "I said we couldn't use the guest suite. I never said anything about this room." "How the hell do you pull this kind of thing off?" "Rick's not showing up before your husband. What we just did took no time at all. I'll introduce you to Ethan. Excuse myself for a bathroom break. While you're chatting, I'll sneak back in here, give Rick what he's owed, and be back before anyone notices." "Jesus, Emma. You're something else. I know, darling. That's why you keep crawling back. So what now? You gonna rinse or kiss your husband with my taste still on your tongue? Wouldn't be the first time he's had a little bit of you." "You're twisted, Emma, rotten to the core. Let's go. We've got a party to host." It's wild how quickly love curdles into hate. One moment, your heart's full. The next, it's a clenched fist. I stood there, caught between storming in and flipping the place upside down, or staying hidden and gathering what I needed. Should I blow it up now, or hold my fire and collect receipts, names, times, faces? If I confronted them tonight, it would dissolve into a courtroom circus. He said, "She lied." I'd say I overheard them. She'd deny everything. I needed more than just rage. I needed leverage. Bursting in would feel good, sure, but then I'd lose my only chance to find out who Rick was, or if there were others besides Rick and the guy in that room with Emma. No. I still had a way to get even. Just not tonight. I walked out quietly and waited in my car, patient, focused, planning. Waiting for the right time, the moment I'd ask Emma to come meet me. When I stepped into the ballroom, I spotted her immediately, sitting at a table with two couples and one guy. Emma's about 173 centimeters. The guy beside her looked maybe 10 centimeters taller, give or take based on proportions. Around 183 centimeters by my guess. Dark, wavy hair, a razor-thin mustache that looked almost drawn on. Even from across the room it was clear he was good-looking. She saw me, stood up, and stepped forward with arms open, leaned in for a kiss. I turned just enough that her lips met my cheek instead. She blinked, a flicker of confusion on her face. "I think I'm catching something," I said softly. "Don't want to get you sick." She gave a small smile and a nod, then introduced me to the table. The good-looking guy? His name was Francis. He stood to shake my hand. My estimate was dead accurate, eye level. I'm 183 myself, and we matched. That mattered. I wanted to know how he'd measure up if things ever got physical. We all sat back down, made small talk. Her co-workers chatted, but I could feel something off. The couples seemed restless, like they were waiting for a cue. I danced with Emma, twice. During the second song, she leaned in close and whispered, "This little virus isn't going to stop you from tearing my clothes off later, is it? I've been craving you all day." "Sure, Emma. I bet." I wanted to hit her with a cold, "Not tonight, Emma." But I didn't. I never called her that. Only Francis did. I wasn't ready to show my hand, so I played along. "Depends how I'm feeling when we get back." What she didn't know was, I would never touch her again. When the music faded and we returned to the table, another guy had joined the group, deep in conversation with Francis. Emma leaned in and introduced him. Rick. About 183 centimeter, maybe 82 kilos. Smooth palms. A jawline that looked like it had never faced a real challenge. I logged every detail. Not long after, Rick excused himself and headed toward another table. I tracked him out of the corner of my eye. No surprise, he detoured into the hallway where Emma and Francis had already made their earlier rendezvous. Apparently, while we were dancing, Francis had prepped the room. A couple of minutes passed, then Emma stood, kissed my cheek again, and said she needed the restroom. Francis waited a beat, then turned to me. "What do you think about the Broncos' odds at the Super Bowl?" That's when it clicked. Emma must have told him I was a football nut. This was his distraction play, designed to hold my attention while she vanished with Rick. I humored him, answered, chatted. But my eyes stayed fixed on the hallway door. And sure enough, less than a minute later, Emma slipped in after Rick. It took almost 15 minutes before Emma finally returned to the table. I kept up casual chatter with Francis, making no indication that I'd noticed how long she'd been gone. When she came back, we hit the dance floor again. She pulled herself tight against me and murmured into my ear, "I'm so turned on right now, baby. Don't let me down tonight." Once we were back at the table, Rick asked her to dance. As they moved toward the floor, I caught one of the women at our table shooting me a sly smile. Her look reminded me of that old saying, the husband is always the last to figure it out. When Rick brought her back, Francis took his turn, and I noticed the two women exchanging a subtle, knowing look. I stored that moment away. If her antics were that transparent to her co-workers, then getting what I needed wouldn't be a challenge. Emma continued mingling, sharing dances with several of her higher-ups, and eventually ended up sitting beside her boss at his desk for a good 15 minutes. When she returned to me, she leaned close and said under her breath, "All done, baby. The right people saw me. I did my job." "Let's go home," she whispered. "And get ready. I want you bad." We'd driven separately, so I told her to go on ahead and gave her plenty of time. I wanted her home, stripped down, lying on the bed like she'd said she would be. That was part of the setup. I drove slowly, deliberately, ensuring she'd be exactly where I needed her. When I arrived, I hurried upstairs, rushed into the bathroom, and launched into an elaborate performance, pretending I was having some sort of stomach issue. I stayed in there a few minutes, adding groans for effect, ran the sink for background noise, and wiped my forehead with a damp towel to look the part. Then I stepped into the bedroom. As expected, Emma was there, nude and waiting. "Sorry, babe," I muttered. "Something's off. I don't think I can do anything tonight. I'm crashing in the guest room. I'll call the doctor tomorrow." The look on her face as I walked out said it all, furious. The next morning, I was already seated at the kitchen table with a coffee when she walked in. I did my best to look drained and unwell. "Any better?" she asked. "Not really. Barely got any sleep," I told her, checking the time. "The doctor's office won't be open until 8:30, I added. "I should probably call in sick." As she poured her coffee and went to get ready, she reminded me, "Don't forget, I'll be home late. Still stuck on that damn budget draft. It's due Tuesday." "Right," I said, pretending to hang up the phone without actually dialing. Once she was out the door, I got dressed, handled the urgent tasks at work, and told my assistant I'd be out the rest of the day for a doctor's appointment. Then I headed to the public library. There, I sifted through directories until I located the contact details for Francis Clayton and Rick Torres. Using the library computers, I dug deeper into Emma's company, gathering names of executives, board members, and department heads. I collected addresses, phone numbers, career backgrounds, and started to identify the ones most likely to panic when scandal reared its head. The prospects looked good. If my gut was right, even the faintest hint of misconduct would bring their whole house of cards tumbling down, Emma, Rick, Francis, and all. That evening, I parked near Emma's office and waited. At 4:10 sharp, she left the building, got into her car, and drove across town. I followed. She pulled into a motel parking lot, walked up to room 131, and after a light knock, Rick opened the door and let her in. 20 minutes later, Francis arrived. He parked, got out, and headed straight for the same room. Seemed like they were having one hell of a strategy meeting about that budget. I couldn't help but think how committed these employees were, putting in unpaid overtime to finalize their proposal. Then again, maybe one of them had slipped in a reimbursement form. Yeah, that had to be it. I jotted down Francis's car make, model, and license plate, then headed home. On the drive, I considered what else I'd uncovered about Rick and Francis. Both were married, though I hadn't yet figured out if their relationships were solid or already crumbling. One thing was obvious. They hadn't shown up to the office party. That raised questions. I needed more on them. Maybe they'd have roles in the final scene of the story I was constructing, the one where all three of them went down together, Emma, Rick, and Francis. I also started piecing together things I'd ignored before. Emma always stayed late on Mondays and Thursdays. I'd never questioned it. She claimed Mondays were tough due to weekend overflow, and Thursdays were crunch time for Friday reports. Why had I accepted that so easily? Love clouds judgment, and I'd been completely blind. Only now was I starting to grasp the full scope of my own stupidity. Later that night, I was lying in bed pretending to read when I heard her come in. I turned off the light, shut the book, and stayed still with my eyes closed. She peeked into the room, then quietly closed the door and headed to her own. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. Sleep evaded me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing, plotting how to take all three of them down in one swift, calculated move. It had to be simultaneous. I couldn't afford to let one of them catch wind of what happened to the others and slip away. When the curtain fell, they'd all know who pulled the strings, and exactly why. That truth hit me like a punch. I sat up, clicked on the lamp, and picked up the book I'd been pretending to read. It was a gripping story, one of a man wrongfully convicted of murder. He'd been sentenced on the strength of fabricated evidence, while a relentless attorney and a sharp-witted private investigator raced against time to prove his innocence before the execution date arrived. That was enough intensity for one night, I thought, placing the book gently on the nightstand and switching off the lamp. My mind finally clear and resolute, I slipped into a deep, undisturbed sleep. Friday morning, I told Emma the doctor had diagnosed me with a stomach virus. The medication, he'd said, should handle the symptoms, and all I needed now was rest. I mentioned I still felt a bit wiped out, though the doctor was confident I'd be well enough to return to work by Monday. He'd suggested I take it easy over the weekend. Emma held my face in her hands and smiled softly. "Rest and get your strength back, love. You're going to need it." She left for work, while I stayed behind with the heavy weight of everything I'd uncovered. After getting dressed, I headed out to dig deeper. By the day's end, I learned Francis's wife, who worked as a legal secretary, hadn't made it to the party because she was out of town taking care of her ill mother. Rick's wife, a real estate agent, had skipped the event to close a deal on a $2 million listing. From the outside, their marriages looked perfectly stable, but that illusion only held because their wives had no clue what was really going on. I promised myself I would make things right, and soon. I spent the weekend resting, playing the role of the recovering husband. On Sunday, I told Emma I was feeling much better and planned to return to the office Monday. I was still slightly off balance, but I figured I could handle it if I paced myself. That Monday night, I followed Emma to the same motel, only this time, she went into room 146. Francis was already waiting at the door to let her in. 5 minutes later, Rick arrived and joined them. I scribbled down Rick's license plate number and drove home. I knew the risks, but I didn't care. The fact that I was ready to put everything on the line told me just how deep my thirst for revenge had grown. It was going to be expensive, but if it worked, it would be worth every cent. I reached out to some discreet contacts, people with connections, and eventually set up a late-night meeting in a dimly lit parking lot. That's where I got exactly what I needed. By the following Sunday, everything was ready. On Monday morning, once Emma had left for work, I committed to the final phase. That evening, I tailed her once more to the same motel. When she, Francis, and Rick were all inside room 136, I got out of my car and walked over to Francis's vehicle. It was unlocked. I opened the trunk and slipped half a pound of marijuana behind the spare tire. Rick's car was locked, but I came prepared. I pulled out the Slim Jim I'd bought from Snap-on Tools and managed to pop the lock. I placed a full pound of weed in his trunk, locked it up again, and left an ounce on the rear bumper, just enough to justify a police search. Then I drove a short distance to a payphone and dialed the police. "There's a drug deal happening in room 136 at the Seabreeze Motel," I told the dispatcher, rattling off the license plate numbers of Emma, Francis, and Rick. When asked for my name, I just laughed. "Not a chance. I'm not getting killed over this," I said, and hung up. From there, I found another payphone and called all 3 local TV news stations, feeding them the same tip I'd given to the police. The new mayor had just won the election on a hardline anti-drug campaign, so I knew the police would act fast, and the media would be hungry for the footage. Using a third payphone, I reached out to Francis's and Rick's wives, letting them know their husbands were holed up at the Seabreeze Motel in room 136 with another woman. Then I drove back and parked a discreet distance away, settling in to watch the show. Within 10 minutes, the first squad cars pulled up, though they took another 30 to organize the raid. A couple of patrol cars arrived first, followed by a SWAT van and 2 unmarked vehicles filled with plainclothes detectives. News vans were already parked and rolling. I watched as 2 SWAT officers slammed the door open with a battering ram, while 4 more stormed inside with weapons drawn. Oh, how I wished I could have seen the look on Emma's face in that moment. 3 minutes later, all three were marched out in cuffs. Francis and Rick were in shorts. Emma, completely nude, had a blanket barely draped over her. I hit speed dial and called Emma's company president. "Did you know 3 of your middle managers are running a drug ring straight from your office?" I asked. I gave him their names and told him what was unfolding at the motel right then. I followed that with calls to each of the 5 board members. The police found exactly what I'd planted. Francis's and Rick's cars held the weed, just as planned, and they found an ounce of cocaine in Emma's purse, along with another 4 ounces hidden under the seat in her car. I couldn't tell if Francis's and Rick's wives were in the crowd, but I sure hoped they were there to see the whole thing fall apart. The bust led the 10 o'clock news on both Channel 2 and Channel 7. I actually laughed when the Channel 7 anchor said, "Mayor Reeves has made good on his promise. A major drug operation was dismantled today at a local motel. No official word yet on the arrests." Footage rolled of the 3 being let out in cuffs. The anchor urged viewers to stay tuned for updates. I turned off the TV, silenced my phone, and went to bed. Emma called not long after, sobbing, begging me to take out a second mortgage to cover her bail. I laughed and ignored her. Eventually, she convinced her parents to come up with the money. When she came home, she found every lock changed and all her belongings boxed up neatly on the driveway. "Why are you doing this?" she cried, stunned. "Because I don't respect who you are anymore, and I won't share a life with someone like that," I said coldly. "You don't understand. Please just hear me out. I understood everything I needed to the moment I saw you naked and handcuffed on the news," I replied, closing the door. I helped her father load her boxes into the U-Haul, but didn't exchange a single word with him. Emma kept calling multiple times a day, but I never picked up. When she tried showing up at my office, I had security escort her out without incident. Not long after, all 3, Emma, Rick, and Francis, were fired. Their legal troubles only got worse. Despite it being their first offense, the mayor's strict no-leniency policy meant no plea deals, no probation. The slap on the wrist they might have expected never came. Claiming innocence didn't do them any favors, not when they were literally found holding the evidence. Emma only dug herself in deeper when she demanded a drug test to prove she wasn't using. The test came back squeaky clean, 0 traces of anything, which the prosecution immediately flipped on her. If she wasn't using, they argued, then those drugs had to be for selling, not personal use. The mayor, eager to score quick wins with his new anti-drug initiative, was applying pressure on the system. So, the 3 of them were given an offer: serve a year in prison and complete 2,000 hours of community service. If they stayed out of trouble, they could be out in 9 months. Their lawyer didn't mince words. He told them flat out that going to trial would destroy them. So they took the deal. While Emma served her time, I filed the divorce papers. Francis's wife did the same, and so did Rick's. They each served their sentence, and when they were released, I kept close watch. When the timing was right, I paid Rick a visit. I later heard he wound up in the emergency room with a shattered arm and 3 cracked ribs. He could have pressed charges, technically, but he didn't. Maybe guilt sealed his lips. Francis had moved in with Emma by then, and one night, I saw the 2 of them walking out of a bar together. I handled Francis first. Then I turned to Emma and said, "Not bad for someone you used to call a pushover, huh, Emma? Remember that Christmas party? The one where you and Francis sneaked off to the back room? Think back to what he told you that night. That if I was really as spineless as you claimed, the 2 of you could screw around right under my nose and I wouldn't lift a finger. Sound familiar, Emma?" Her face changed. You could almost watch the realization dawn on her, piece by piece. I let out a laugh. "Yeah, Emma, that so-called pushover finally evened the score. You might want to call someone for your boyfriend. He's not in the best shape right now." She stood frozen, eyes locked on mine, as I slid into my car and drove off. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.